Welcome to my demo on JavaScript manipulating the DOM. First off, let's get into what is the DOM. The DOM stands for Document Object Model, which means, coming from W3 schools, the HTML DOM is a standard object model and programming interface for HTML. It defines the HTML elements as objects, the properties of all the HTML elements, the methods to access all HTML elements, and the events for all HTML elements. In other words, the HTML DOM is a standard for how to get, change, add, or delete HTML elements. In researching this topic, I found a great video resource in which I'm basing a lot of my demonstrations on. Though I have modified them to make them more in line in what we've learned so far. That video can be found on YouTube. It's called JavaScript DOM Manipulation, Full Course for Beginners, and is produced by the people who bring you free code camp. It's very good, a little confusing at times, and I think I've grabbed the best of it. Now, when you look at a typical HTML page in an editor, it kind of looks like an outline. But a better analogy is thinking of the DOM as a family tree. It's a better analogy because of how the elements relate to one another and because JavaScript uses this family-style relationship in DOM manipulation. So the DOM family tree is a hierarchy of all the elements found on a web page. And this starts with the actual browser tab that the HTML page is being displayed in. Next part is the document. When you notice when you write it into document type, it declares HTML. Well, the document is the child of the window. And this is how the hierarchy for the whole page develops. Next, we have the HTML element, which is the child of the document, grandchild of the window. The HTML element has a couple of children. It has the head and the body, both of which are children of the HTML element, which makes the head and the body siblings. Focusing on the head element for a moment, it can have many children. One, for example, we always use is title. So the title is the child of the head element. And interestingly, the title itself has a child, which is the actual text within the title. On the other side, when we look at the body, it has many children. Often we start off with the header, and then in the header can have children like an H1. It may be a paragraph. These are both children. And again, because they're both children of the same element, it makes these two elements siblings. And again, like the title, the H1 has a child, which is the text within the H1, as does the paragraph has a child, which is the text within the paragraph. Now, all these elements, also referred to as tags, all these elements can be interacted with, called upon, console logged through JavaScript. And we also know that a lot of these elements can also have attributes like classes and IDs. These classes and IDs can also be used to call upon and manipulate the various elements within an HTML page. This is where we're going to start with how to select elements using JavaScript. I'm going to be using VS Code. I've installed a module that allows it to to go live, which has a couple of nice features, which I'll explain as we go on. Excuse my voice. I am getting over, I'm still in the throes of pneumonia, and my voice is betraying me. I feel better, or a little better than I sound. I hope my voice isn't too annoying. Let's go live, and that's going to open up the page in this port over here. We will inspect it so we can get the console log up. So basically we have a simple page. We know how to create these. You know, it's okay, this link here, it's a weird thing with something was thrown an error. This means absolutely nothing, but it stops the error. It's nothing you should bump into. So basically we have basic heading. I got the title. I'm connected to my CSS sheet. Very simple stuff. I'm not going to go, unless it's something we're using to manipulate what's on the page through JavaScript. I'm not going to get too much into the CSS stuff because we all know how to do this by now. If anybody has any questions specifically on anything, I will respond to them, answer any questions, and I also plan on making all my code available so you guys can play with it on your own. I'm planning on doing pen code and just putting all the files up online somewhere. At least that's my plan at this point. So we're going to go over how to select DOM elements. There's some 5 basic ways, or very common ways, and they're kind of self-explanatory. There's getElementById, getElementByClassName, byTagName. Remember, tags are just body. Body is an element. It's a tag. Just like in CSS, there are all the elements that you don't have to put a hashtag or a dot before. querySelector and querySelectorAll. So let's go back for a second and look to the HTML page. Now, if you're down here, here's one of the nice things about using VS Code is when you open things as a folder, and that's what I did here. I opened this as a folder, and I'll show you that when we get to the next demo. When you open something as a folder, it knows that all the files within that folder are related. So look down here where we have the script item. Let me show you. So when I create everything, because I want to be able to upload this to the web, I treat my folders as if they were my online folders. So, and I want all my HTML pages to be indexes for the most part. So I will create an index for each demo, and then inside the index I have a JavaScript folder and a CSS folder. I always use the same structure. This makes manipulating things later easier, and I'll show you why. So if I go in here, like I said, I don't even have to remember what the name of it is because I know I only have one file in that folder. Or I believe I only have one file. It'll tell me in a second. JS/. There we go. Selecting DOM elements. And now I hit save. That's the error I was talking about. Let me grab that. This just started popping up. I'm not sure why, but I looked it up, and if I paste in this piece of code, it gets rid of the error. And that's the second nice thing about using VS Code is when you're live, whenever you save something, it automatically updates it over here. So for demo purposes, it's really handy. I have to say that DOM is what makes everything you've learned in JavaScript make sense. This is why you want to learn JavaScript. I wish they could introduce some of this DOM concept earlier so you realize the power of JavaScript much earlier before you might give up, which I have done in the past many times. So let's get into this a little. Let's get into here. So let's talk about how to get elements by ID. So one of the things that they do a lot in JavaScript is there's 2 concepts that's going on that's good to know. is one is the idea that coders like to make useful names. Just like in the HTML here, we have fairly useful names. Like we have class item, list items. Okay, very descriptive, you know what it is. But the downside is, or the confusing thing when you're first learning, is that often they create a variable with the same name. Now the variable and the HTML item aren't the same thing. It isn't until you assign the HTML element to a variable that the JavaScript knows to look at the HTML and then it understands what it is. So a constant with a certain name and an HTML element with a certain same name aren't the same things. And I hope you'll understand that as we go along. So so for everything you try to do, you create a variable first so you can manipulate that variable. So first thing we're going to do here is going to construct. Another nice thing, you start typing, and then when you see the words, you can just hit enter. And we're going to construct a variable called title. Okay, and we're going to have that title equal. We want it to be document, and we're going to use the method of getElementById, and that'll take a string, and it's going to be an ID string because that's the method we're using. And we have, if we look back at our ID over here is main heading, so we could just go over here and copy this because everything matters. Case matters, spelling matters, everything matters. Okay, we can put that right in there, and as usually is the case, we add a semicolon. And now, if we hit save, nothing happens. Why? Because we've only collected things. We haven't done anything with it. So what we could do is go console log title, and let's get that semicolon, and now hit save. And if we look over here, look what we have. We have main heading. And now I open this up to show you something. Is once JavaScript knows it's an HTML item and goes into the HTML, this is all the information it now knows about that element. There's so much information once it knows what it is. That's why we assign the elements into a variable, and then JavaScript can access all the information about that variable. So that's why up here we console log the title and not the main heading. Okay, so now from here, some of the things we can do is we can manipulate something like the title. We're up here, we got the title, so we can go title dot style, and this is going to change the CSS on this thing. Inline, which is old school, which is how we used to have to do it before CSS was around. And let's make the heading yellow. Use a nice simple color that'll go okay with that background. And now when we hit save, we've changed it. And now if we go over and we look at the HTML, and we look at the line here, we can see that it's added the style right into the line. So it's added it on a per line basis. Okay, which that'll be important in a minute. The other thing that we can do now that we have we've constructed a variable that it contains the heading is we can also console log what's inside the title. And we do that by console log title, and then we add inner text, and let's not forget our semicolon, and let's update and see what happens. And then we have it. So we can get the title, and it brings back the element type and its ID, and we can also go inside and call upon what's inside that title. Now the next thing, again, I'll include all this in the files, but I'm going to just clear this out so I can clear out the console. I don't want to have a whole bunch of stuff in there. It'll get confusing. I'm going to leave the title construct uncommented because we might use that later. Okay, so next thing we want to look at is how to get elements by class name. Yeah, I actually should have had that on top, shouldn't I? Let's move that. Make it make more sense. There we go. So get element by class name is going to be next. Okay, so again, we're going to just construct a variable. Okay, and we'll do what the code would love to do is, even though, again, don't get confused. We have list items here. Okay, and I'm going to create a variable called list items. But they're not the same thing unless you make them the same thing. I'm going to go document dot get elements by class name, and now I got to give it the class name. Again, just to avoid any errors, I'm going to go in here and copy the class name, come back, paste it in, semicolon, I'll save, and again, all we've done is we collected them. We haven't, so we don't see anything in the console yet. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, if we want to see what's in there, let's log it. Console log. And again, because it's a variable and not a string, if we remember what that is, I don't need the quotes. And now if I hit save, there we go, we have a collection. And look, see if you notice, so I can open this up and it'll show the list items. And look, it displays it in brackets. When it lists them out, it starts with 0 and goes to 4 and has a length of 5. That looks a lot like an array. And it is. It's a prototype. It's an HTML collection, but it also acts and can be acted upon as an array. And we'll see how that works. So now, up top, we were able to change the color of the title to yellow. So let's see if we can do the same thing and change the colors of the list items to yellow. So I'm just going to go up here and grab that same thing we used without the comment out. I'm going to go down, just paste it, and I'm going to switch list items for title. Same code, same process, and why don't we make it green this time? And let's see what happens. I'm going to hit save. It didn't like it. I wonder why. Well, remember when we up top, it was a line item, or it inserted the code in the HTML by line? Well, it doesn't know where to put it. We have 5 elements. Where would it put it? So why don't we try something like, because we saw that it was an array, why don't we treat it as, oops, wrong type of brackets. Let's treat it as an array. And now let's see what happens. Look at that. it changed the first one. Well, so if it changed the first one, let's change that to that. And now it changes the second one. So we could make 5 of these and change all of them. But one of the things in Java code is, or in code in general, is you look to reduce the amount of code as often as possible because it makes your pages work a little faster. So remember the for loops we learned about? Great time to use a for loop. So let's comment this out. And we'll write a simple for loop. Now, if you've done the, I think I received even in the first half of the tutorials, I think the for loops were in there. So basically all we're going to do is for, and we're going to use a variable. The standard variable in this is just I. And I was saying when I is equal, this is declaring it, the variable, and setting it to 0. So I equals 0. And for as long as I is less than, excuse me, for as long as I is less than, and we're going to use list items as a reference, and we're going to, oops, I missed the L, didn't I? We're going to and use its length. So as long as it's less than the length, then on the out, we're going to increment it. Okay, and then for as long as the first line, for as long as this line is true, it's going to go in and perform this function. What it's going to do, it's going to, and again, I'll try to copy this proper this time. List items. And I'm going to use the bracket I, and then style dot color. And let's stick with that green. And we need a semicolon. I think that should work. So let me hit save and let's see what happens. Nothing happened. What did I? Oh, how did that change? I did something that I don't know where this came from. I was looking at the other side of the screen when it happened. So let's try it again. Hey, it worked. And if we look down here, on a line-by-line basis, it's put in the style color. Like I said, this starts to make all the stuff, all the earlier Java stuff, make so much more sense. The next way we can get things is by getElementsByTagName. And again, it's going to be very similar. So I'm just going to construct a variable, and I'm going to call it list by tag, and I will make that equal to document dot, and this is where you go. Get element by tag name. Okay, and what tag are we looking for? We want the list, so the list tags, if we look at the HTML over here, are li. So we put li. Oops, I gotta go on the outside. And why don't we just put that console log up there right away? Okay, I want to. So I'm going to come. Well, I'm going to leave that for a second. So I'm going to, when I hit save, I want you to see something. Okay, so up here in this line, we console log the list items. The list, and this was by class name. So, and look at the results from that and the results of the console log list by tag are identical. Why? Let's look back here. Every li has the class list item. So they both return identical results. Two ways to do the same thing if they have the same type of element and have the same class. So I'm going to comment out the log items just to clear out the console, but I'll leave the characters green for a minute. Okay, now querySelector works a little bit different in that when you use it, it will return the first instance of whatever selector you choose. And the selector can be a tag, it can be an ID, it can be a class. So because if we look up in the previous ones, you know, we had getElementById, so we just put in the name of the ID because it knew it was expecting an ID. Down here, when we call upon something like an ID, this is where we're going to have to use the hashtag. If we're calling back a class, this is where we're going to have to use the dot when we're calling it back. And again, it's only going to call back the very first instance. So let me save this just to clear out. Let's construct a query list variable. And we'll just call this query list. And it's the same. Always start with the document. And now we're gonna, like we've done before, every time before, this time the method we're gonna use is querySelector. And now we have to put in what we're querying. Okay. And this is a tag, so it doesn't need the hashtag or the period. Okay, so remember, all this has done so far is collect it. So now, right off the bat, I'm just going to console log query list, and let's see what happens. There's only one, because that's all it gives you. Okay. But let's try this. So just like we did early on, if I make a duplicate of this and I go dot inner text, save that, it returns the inner text. If we look back here, the inner text of the first element is Marvel Cinematic Universe. We come back here and there we go. So let's try doing the same thing and create a variable for a querySelectorAll. Again, I'm going to comment these out just so I can clear out the console. Here we go. So construct query list all and equal document, and the method is querySelectorAll, and we're going to query the list items again, and again we're going to console log query list all, and hit save. And there we go. It shows 5 items. We open that up, and again, it's given us a new array. And again, this can be treated like an array. And let's try that inner text thing again. So inside, oops. I don't know why that's not auto-completing for me. Undefined. So let's see if that, it's an array, right? So what can we do with arrays? Maybe we can put the 0 in and hit save, and it works. Put 1 in and it works, and so forth. You can iterate right through the whole list. So that means we could, if we get rid of this, we can make, let's comment it, let's do another for loop. Oops, didn't meant to do that. Okay, so let's try another for loop. Okay, same format as before. We've got I, and I could be anything. It's just convention that that's what you use. And less than, and again we're going to use the variable, it's the length of the variable itself as the test, and as long as it passed the test, we want to increment the variable. And now as long as this is true, it's going to pass into the function, and the function we want here is console, oops, log queryAll, and now we add the bracket I, because that's, as it goes through, I is going to start off as 0, then it'll be 1, then it'll be 2, then it'll be 3, then it'll be 4, and then when it hits 5, it's going to be the same, and the function in the test is no longer going to be true, so it's not going to iterate to a 5th. One of the ways making arrays start at 0 makes sense. At first it just seems, well, why do they do that? It's so annoying. But this is one of the uses for it. Okay, where am I here in this? Okay, we want to that, and then dot inner text, and let's not forget the semicolon, and let's hit save and see what happens. Look at that, it iterated through, and it gave us all 5 names. So some other things we can do is with selecting elements, we can also create elements. So let's create a new variable. And because what we want to do is we want to put, let's look back at the HTML up here. Okay, so everything, we want to create an LI and add it to the UL. Okay, we have an unordered list with 5 elements. Each element is a list item, and our goal is to add an item to the list. So to do that, we're going to construct a variable, and using names that make sense, we're going to call it UL, and UL we're going to assign, and we'll use querySelector. It wouldn't matter if we use querySelectorAll here because there's only one UL, or we could do it by tag because there's only one of them, but we'll just use queryUL. Okay, if I hit save, all that is done, it's collected that into that container. Okay, now we want to construct a variable called li. And this we're not calling on the HTML to collect this li. We want to create this li. So we're going to use a method. Oh, yep. You see, look up here with some of the different things that you can. Oh, uppercase. See some of the different things we can create. We want to create an element. So we're going to create an element, and the type of element we want to create is an li. So again, we're not reaching into the HTML and grabbing an li or all the li's. What we're doing is we're constructing a variable to create a new li. Okay? And now we want to add the new li to our ul. So we go ul dot append, and we give it li, and look what happened. Now we haven't given the li any text, but we can already see over here in the browser that it's created a new li. And if we look at the element over here, we can see an empty li down the bottom. So now if we want to, let's go back. And if we, let's see, we'll just do a quick console log. So that's why I left the variable up top, list items alive, for this part. I mean, I could have copied it down, but so now look, if we look in here, remember before we have now. Okay, but what's going on here is I have yet to I haven't assigned a class to it yet or any text. So let's do that next. And it's pretty simple now that we've created it. So it's just li, and just like we've called upon inner text before to reveal it, we use inner text. Oops, with the equals to assign it. Okay, so we've assigned it. It's in the li, but it doesn't have a class. But we can add classes in. So first, I'm going to give it I can like give it an ID, and if you see here, it's a set attribute, and you tell it what attribute you want to set, and then the name. So this attribute I haven't made, but I can go li dot set attribute. I can tell it I'm going to set an ID, and I'll give it a name, ID example. And you see we've been able to give this the ID example. Just as easy as set attribute, we can remove an attribute. So let's do that. And this doesn't need to know the name, it just needs to know the attribute that you're removing. And let's update that and see what happens over here. And now it's gone. So why don't we add a class? And class, we can use a similar method called classListAdd. Let me copy that. And then you just type in the class. So li dot classListAdd, and let's give it the same class everything else has, which is the list items. And let's open this back up. And you see now this has list items. But oh, look up here. It's still blue. Why? Because that for loop that we used to change the color was way up here. So now let's see if I take this, and now if I copy this, let's comment it out. So we don't have two instances going. And we bring it down here. And now hit save. Now that has it too, because before this was created, now it's after it's created, so now it recognizes it and it loops through. And that's one of the nice things of using the length in this formula up here, is that it doesn't matter what the length is. If the length changes, this knows that the length has changed. The other thing you can do is you can use this to add additional classes. Now, if we look over in the CSS, I created list items.alt -alt, and I just upped the font weight to bold just to test this out. So if I go into here and then just add the -alt, remember this li is only referencing the Avengers. That's the one we added. That's what we created that variable to do. It's not the same as trying to change the appearance of all the li items in the HTML. It's the li variable that we created. So if I hit save here, we can see that Avengers is now turned bold. And just like we were able to add a class, if we go down here and we can change add to remove, oops, and hit save, and now that's gone. Again, let me point that out in the window. We comment that out. And if we look in here, now it has two classes, list items and list items alt. Okay. Save, and now it's removed. Okay, so let's clean up this. Let's clean this up a little bit. Comment both of these out. And let's get rid of some of these console logs. There we go. Let's get rid of this. There we go. Clean console again. So let's look at traversing the node a little bit. And this, I just have everything already commented out because it just gets very repetitive. So there are two nomenclatures they're using. You can see node, and then sometimes you'll see element. Now, they're very similar, but there are some places where they are a little different. So let's hit this and just So console log ul, okay, and then then let's console log its parent node. Okay, and if we go back to the HTML, we see that ul, its parent, is this div right here. And so its grandparent should be body. Let's go back and check for the grandparent. And let's look for the great-grandparent. Now, we can also check parent elements. And in this search, it's going to look the exact same. Where parent and nodes start to get a little different is when we get into the children, or when we get really high up in the hierarchy. Here's an example. So I'll do this one first. So HTML, if I console log its parent element, there. So I'm going to construct the HTML element. And I'm going to look for its parent element. If we look at the HTML, we can tell that it's at the top. So there's not another element. There's a node, but there's not an element. The document isn't an element, it's a node. So if we comment, bring this back in, and you can see, so if we're looking for the node, we get document. If we go look for a parent, we get nothing. So let's look at something that has children. Okay, let's look at the nodes of the children. And I made a comment here, and I'll explain it in a second. Here's where the difference really matters when it comes to, like we've seen before, that you can, when you collect stuff or in like this, and it brings back an array that we can treat it as an array. But there's a difference between a node array and an element array, especially when it comes to children. If we open this up, we see text, list item, text. So what's this text? It's not the text. So let's look at the HTML. It's not this. It's not seeing this. So in the DOM structure, we're at the UL level, and we hit enter. It's indenting to create the next thing. And this indentation, because it's off from the parent, this is being identified as a node, this indentation. So this indentation right here, when we look, is this text item right here. So it's not text, it's just the indentation. Now we can also console log for first child. And the first child is text. Again, referring to this indentation. So this isn't so first child, and so last child gives you something, the first child doesn't. So when you're collecting things, or when you're trying to ID things this way, it's better to use children. And then we'll see the difference here. So if I uncomment the first part, okay, now we get a 6-item list because the Avengers are still included. But it's only the items. It's not. So that's the difference between the nodes. So for the most part, you want to stick, if you're going to use this, is to go with the children and the element over the nodes. So let's comment that out. clean up our list, and now we can see what these give us. Let's do these two, and it gives you what you would expect. It gives you the first one, and it gives you the last one. Okay, so now we're getting all the inner text. We can get the inner text. So this is console log ul children, and I'm going for the index 2, which is the third element. 1, 2, 3. It should give us back Spider-Man. And let's save, and it gives us back Spider-Man. We change that to 3, and it should give us Harry Potter. Okay, and like we've done before, we can use a for loop. So let's see what happens if we do a for loop with the nodes, and we can kind of guess this. So the for loop, it goes through each one, but look, it's giving you the text too, those indentation lines, which we don't want. So let's get rid of that. And now let's try the same loop, but we're going to do it with the children and not the nodes. And there we go. So lastly in this section, we're going to look at sibling nodes and how you can tell. So let's save that. So we go next element sibling or previous element sibling. Let's see what happens. I'm going to uncomment both of these and hit save, and what do we get? We get a null and we get the H1. So let's look back at the HTML, and if we look at the UL, it has its previous sibling is the H1, and it has no sibling beneath it. There's nothing, there's nothing here. There's no additional item. So it doesn't have any sibling after it. Okay, next we're going to look into event listeners. Like we did in one of the examples, in one of our assignments, we can add an event listener right into an item. So let's go to this button 1 here, and we can add it right in the HTML. So we can go on click, and let's have it throw an alert. And in the alert, we want it to say, I am listening. Okay, hit the save. And now if we come over here and we hit, and we got now our alert. The problem is, what if if you have a bunch of buttons, you don't want to be inserting this. So let's go over to our JavaScript, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna construct a button 2, so we can manipulate it. Construct, and let's call it button 2. Then we're going to make that equal to document querySelector, and if we go back, we want to attach this to button 2. So let's go over and make sure we copy that exactly. Don't forget our semicolon. And we've created it. Doesn't do anything yet, but we've created it. Okay, so now we're going to create a function to attach to that button. And we'll just call it alert button. Right. And all it's going to do is just create an alert. And we'll have it say, I am listening to. Save that. You see, we don't see anything in the console yet, because all we've done was we've created a variable for button 2, and we've created a function. But now we have to put them together. So let's take button 2, add an event listener. We're listening for a click, and when we get the click, we want to run the function alert button. Let's hit save. Didn't like something. Button 2, document querySelector button 2 function. Oh. Remember I said when you use the query selector, it doesn't know what type of element you're looking for. And I made that mistake right here. I have to include the dot to let it know that it's because if we look back at the HTML, it's being identified by a class. So that's what I was forgetting I didn't put. So I'm glad I did that. I'm glad you saw that. So now I hit that. Now the error goes away. And so I can go over here, click that, get rid of it, and now here, there we go. I'm listening to. So we both not too sure what these violations are. There's probably a better way to do both of these, and it looks like this is maybe running for too long. So let's look at another type of listening event. It's called a mouse over. And we'll add this to button 3. So let's do it. What we'll do instead of an alert, we'll just change. We'll change its background color when it's moused over. So let's construct, call it new BG color and document dot query selector. And I won't make that mistake again, so we will go and we want btn 3. I remembered the dot that time. Okay, and what we want to do is now we're going to create a function to change the color. So we'll just use obvious naming, change BG color, and what we're going to have it do is the variable new BG color now has the button in it. So we're going to take that variable and we're going to, like we did very early on, we're just going to use the style. Okay, dot style. Color And we're going to set the background color to, now all these boxes have black backgrounds, but with a very low opacity. So all I want to do is increase the opacity of the black background. So I'm going to use an RGBA color. RGB, red, green, blue. A is the alpha channel or the opacity. So RGBA, and we want values of 0, 0, 0, and let's do something like 80%. Close parentheses. And let's not forget our semicolon. Let's save that. No errors. Okay, and now we have to do the event listener. So let's grab our variable. Add an event listener. This time the listener is going to be a mouse over, and when we get the mouse over, we want to trigger the change color function. Save, and let's see, we know this works. We know this works, and that worked. So that's demo 1 of event listeners. Let's open up demo 2. Okay, I want to open up my index and the JS. I want to open up my JS, which is empty, and my CSS. Again, we won't delve into the CSS unless we need to. Okay. What we're going to do here is we're going to reveal text. Okay, if we look at the HTML, all we have is a heading, simple heading. We have a div with a class container. We have a button, which is right here, which actually looks like a whole container. I made it as big, and let's go to here, right here, and then hidden content. I'm gonna comment that out real quick. So this is basically what is built into the HTML. We have a button and a sibling div that are taking up the same height, but the text here is going to remain hidden. This text I just got from literature lipsisorum, so it's just gibberish. Let me go back to so we will look at the CSS here. So right now, this div class has 2 classes, hidden content and boxes. Okay, that's so I can use the same styling to make the button and the text box look the same. But but it has a second class because I want it to start off hidden. So the only thing in this class is display none. So we're gonna jump over to the JavaScript. We're gonna start making some variables. So first thing we need to construct is a variable that'll contain the button. So let's call that reveal button. Reveal btn. And now let's collect it. document dot querySelector and let's start with that dot, and let's just so we make sure we have the right thing. Reveal btn. Copy that. Come back over here. I got the. Okay, that is constructed. Okay, so the next variable we're going to need is one for the hidden content, so we can trigger that to be seen. We'll hit construct. Hidden content. And let's call upon what we want. querySelector. And I'll put in the dot just to make sure the spelling is correct. I'll grab this, come back, oops, paste that in there, don't forget the semicolon. So we've created our two variables, and now let's put them to work. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to create a function that's going to reveal the content. And so let's create a function, and let's call it reveal. Oops, reveal content. Okay, and what the function is going to do, we're going to use an if statement, so it's going to check. Okay, so now if hidden content class list, so that it checks for all the classes that hidden content might have. If class list contains the class of reveal, oh, no, it's just looking for a class, don't need the dot. All right, don't think I need the dot. Okay, so now what we're saying, we want it to check to see if it contains that. Okay. And if it does, we want hidden content class list to remove the reveal button class. Okay. Else we want it to do. If it has the class reveal button, we want to remove it, and if it doesn't have it, we want to add it. So let's copy this down here, and instead of remove, we want to add, and that's our function. So it's kind of like a toggle. I think all the syntax looks right. Okay, now finally we need to do our event listener. So reveal button, and we add event listener. We're listening for a click. And when we hear that click, we want to fire off the reveal content function. Okay, let's see if it works. So reveal text, and there we go. Now you can see how useful this can be. You could have a series of these that you could have a series of boxes on the left, and every time you click one, it changes what's on the right. This has a lot of functionality to it. And look at this. It's just, I mean, I got spaces too. This was, this whole thing is 16 lines. You take out the spaces, and it's so small, so easy. But this is just the power of DOM manipulation with JavaScript. Like I said, once you get into it, it's really kind of fun. And this is where JavaScript makes sense. Let's look at another example. This is an event listeners 3. Again, open up what I tried to do is go in and empty out everything after I made sure it worked. So we'll go live. Okay, so this is about event delegation, which is really kind of cool. So you've seen how we've used for loops before, and we could do stuff by item. This is a way to do it a little bit differently and maybe a little more efficiently. That's what I wanted. Okay, so let's look at the HTML. Very simple. We all know how to do this. Body H1 with the title up here. We got an unloaded list. The unloaded list has 5 elements to it. Really basic, really simple. Nothing fancy with the CSS. So we don't. And let's go to our. Okay, so now there's a few things in here. So event delegation. This is kind of the cool part of it. Event delegation allows users to append a single event listener to a parent element that adds it to all its present and future descendants that match the selector. And we'll experiment with that functionality and show. So sometimes you'll build dynamic arrays that will have items added to it, or you might have users might be able to add input that append to an existing array, and this type of JavaScript code will work no matter how many items get added, because we're applying it to the parent element and not on the children. So let's walk through how this works. So another thing we're going to be using here is so basically what we want to do is whatever we click on over here, we want it to trigger an event, and we want what happens to happen to whatever element triggered the event. So we use this combination of event and target, and the short code is just E for event. So it'll make more sense as we start doing this. So we're gonna just do document querySelector. We're querying for. Now let's try to bring. So look, all these don't have classes. These have IDs. So let's query for the first one, and that means I got to use a hashtag. Okay. Now we can kind of string this all together in a more shortcode. So we can add an event listener. That listener is listening for a click. Yeah. Okay, so in one go, we're selecting we're querying the selector. We're adding an event listener to it right away, and then we're creating what the listener is listening for, and we're building the function all in one go. Again, one of the things in JavaScript, and we've seen that in some of the free code camp on how you can truncate some of the coding. So instead of creating the multiple lines we've done in previous demos, we're kind of capturing it all in fewer lines. So what we're going to do here is first we're going to know that we're going to console football is clicked. So when football is clicked, the first thing it's going to do is console log that the football has been clicked. And now we're just going to use an if statement. If, first we have to construct a variable, sorry. So we're going to construct a variable called target. And we want to make sure it targets the element that triggered it. And now we can get to our if statement. If target matches, which is another JavaScript method. So it's kind of like, you know, how before we've seen contains. So this is checking to see if the target matches whatever we put in here. And what we want to check to see if the target is a list item. And if it is, we want to take that target element and let's see if this, no, it didn't. Okay, and then what I want to do is I want to text transform the text in that element, and I want to capitalize it. Okay, now let's see if I coded that correctly. No errors over here. So what should happen is I should be able to click on the football. Football is clicked, and now football starts with a capital F. But now we want to look at how do we do this so it doesn't matter. So we don't have to. I don't want to have to add this to every. I don't want to have to select every one. I mean, I could just copy this whole thing, you know, and let's see, go over to index, and let's grab baseball, and then back, and then wherever I see football in this code, I'll just add baseball. Baseball has been clicked. Oops. Just two, right? Let's save and let's see what happens. So football, baseball, yeah. So I could do this for all 5 of them, but that's a lot of code. I mean, look. I mean, I won't. And again, length of code over to, you get enough code and it's going to slow down your page. So let's get rid of all that. And let's do it a different way. Okay, so we've lost all the functionality. So we're going to and this time what we're going to do is let's go back and look. So we don't want to query for any of these. We want to query for the parent. And the parent has an ID of sports. So we want to query for I'm going to add the event listener. Again, it's going to be listening for a click. And then the function, which we're going to pass the parameter e. Okay, and now, this time, we're going to console log e.target. Plus, so we're gonna get the target attribute, the ID, which is gonna be the name, and then we're gonna add to the name space is clicked. And why don't we throw that variable? Why don't we construct that variable again and put that first? Just like we did before, target. Oh. Equal to e dot target semicolon, and then now we'll go down here and we'll do our if statement. If target matches, again, which we're seeing if it's a list item, and if it is, we're gonna style okay, so let's save that. Didn't throw an error yet, so let's test it out. Okay, football. Football is clicked and it's uppercase. Baseball is clicked. Basketball is clicked. Hockey is clicked. And soccer is clicked. Not too bad. But so we've covered the first part of this description of event delegation. Now let's check into the second part. Let's add a list item. So remember how we did this before? We kind of have to create we have to construct something that's going to hold the sports. Like, so let's go through that. So we're going to construct sports. Okay, and sports is going to be equal to the document querySelector, and what we're looking for is the element that has the ID of sports, which should be the UL that contains all the list items. Okay. Next thing we want to do is we want to construct a new sport. Okay, and that new sport is going to be so in the document we want to create an element, and we want that the element created to be a list item. Okay, so now the JavaScript knows that sports is the UL with the ID sports, and now we're going to create a list item and we're going to put it into sports. So first off, let's roll new sport. Inner text. Equals, and let's say tennis. And we remember this before, so new sport. We want to give, because remember up top that in order to get football is clicked, it's reading the ID of the box that has football. So we got to give tennis an ID of tennis, or it won't make sense. So we're going to set attribute, and the attribute we want to set is an ID, and we want that ID to be tennis. And then finally, so right now we have constructed the element li, the new sport, which is an li. We've constructed it, we've given it the inner text of tennis, and we've given it the ID of tennis. Now if we append it onto the UL, we should see it show up, and it should have the functionality that we've already assigned to the other list items. So let's try that. So sports, which is the variable that contains the UL. We want to append a child. We want to give it a new child. And the new child it's going to get is going to be the new sport. Okay. So now the first thing I expect is when I hit save is that we should see an additional sport under soccer. So let's try that. We'll hit save, and there's tennis. Okay, so let's check the functionality. Did we break anything? Football is clicked, baseball is clicked, basketball is clicked, hockey is clicked, soccer is clicked, tennis is clicked. It worked. Now let's get into more of a little mini project. And I have one right here in the first mini project we're going to do. We're going to make a JavaScript quote generator. So let me open that up. Make sure my G. Okay. and let's go live. It's really a nice workflow. So again, we don't really have to go over the CSS. We know how to do this. Maybe you haven't. Well, so like I said, I'm going to make these files available, and I'll even make my photos available. This is my photo. But if you don't want to use my photo, you can easily just let's see. Okay. Will that toggle? No. So I have this commented outline just so if you don't want to be bothered playing on an image, you don't need to. But for me, let me change that back. Okay. And this is, you've added images and stuff to pages before, and this is the same thing. It's just background, the URL. It's a relative URL, so it's going up, and just so to go over that again, we'll look at it here. So basically, what that ... means is that the image lives in this folder, but the CSS lives in this folder. So it is backing up. That's what the dots are, and then going into this folder and getting this image. A little bit of review. Okay. So like a simple HTML, we start the HTML off with, so we have a div that's called just a container, header, which is just which contains an h2, which is the title. We have a div of main content, a div of text area, and in the text area we have a span with the class of quote that will hold the quote. Its sibling is a div with the class of person, which will hold the author of the quote. And then finally, another sibling, which is the button, a div which is the button. And the button has an ID of new quote. So let's get to work in the Java. Okay, so these quotes, I looked up and I just found a page full of quotes, and this was the first one that was on there, and we're going to add some. We're going to add about 19 more. I'm just going to copy and paste. I'm not going to take the time to type everything out, but let's construct some variables first. First, we need a button variable. Okay, and this button variable is going to be for the new quote button. Okay, then we're going to create one for the quote. I really hope this. I mean, I don't have to explain this because you by now can see the pattern. We've done this a bunch of times, and I really encourage you to go and watch the whole tutorial that the Free Code Camp guys made, and look for other ones, because once, like I said, the DOM stuff, if you want to learn JavaScript, DOM makes it make sense. At least it did for me. Okay, and now we're going to construct the quotes. I have the quotes in another document, and I'm just going to copy and paste them to save a little time. and I'm bringing them in as an array. So, wrong brackets. And we've seen arrays before. And so I'm bringing them in as an array. I'm bringing in an array of objects. And if you don't remember what an object is, you'll see it in a minute. So let me copy that. So I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to paste a whole bunch of objects. So remember, objects, each object has to be separated by a comma, except for the last one. And in each object, there's a quote and a person. So this way, when we're going to use a random number generator to randomly bring up new quotes. We're not going to just go down in the list. And by using the object, as we've seen before, we can call this back, and we can call quotes back and get an array. And that means the array item for quote and the array item for person is the same thing, so they'll always match. Other thing, if you notice it in this quote, sometimes you'll see this backslash. If you haven't gotten into that part of JavaScript yet, certain characters will throw an error or will be read differently by JavaScript. So the quote mark here that I'm using for don't will be read like I'm adding in a quote, and I don't want that, so I just put this slash here to tell JavaScript, no, this is just text, it's just punctuation, it's not a special character. I won't go any more into that, but just anywhere, if you download these files, anywhere you see that slash, that is just to prevent, to indicate that a special character is being used as text and not as a special character. Okay, I'm just gonna close this up because we don't need to see them all, and it'll make, that way I can keep all the other code on the same page. We can see everything at the same time. Okay, so now we're gonna take our button. Okay, we're gonna take our button, and we're gonna add an event listener to it. Okay, and that event listener is listening for a click. And then once it gets the click, it's going to run a function. And that function is going to be, let's give it some space. Okay. Now, we're going to use a math function. This is another reason why arrays starting with 0 makes sense, because and I'll explain how this math function works. We're going to create a variable called random that we're going to use to generate random numbers. Okay, so we're going to use a math function called floor. What floor does is it will round a number down to the next lowest whole number. So if our math function throws 1.5, it'll round it down to 1. And if we're using this to roll through an index, we need whole numbers. Okay? Now, in the floor function, we're going to pass another function, math function, called random. Now, the random variable in the math.random function are not the same thing. Again, you bump into this a lot of times. You know, you try to use names that make sense, but then so just don't get confused. Math.random, random is a method of math. Random, the variable here, is just a variable. Okay. Now, what math.random does, it generates a number between 0 and 1. It includes 0, but it doesn't include 1. Okay? So that means you can get up to 0.99999, but you can never get to 1. But you can get 0. And so what we want to do is we want to multiply by the length of quotes. Okay, an array starts with an array. This is going to be an array of 20 items, but the index of that array is going to be 0 to 19. So because math.random never gets to 1 and quotes.length will be 20, we can never get to a 20. But we don't need to because the array's index starting at 0. So we can get a 19, an 18, all the way down to 0. And that's why we use the floor, because it's going to bring, you might be able to generate a 19.99, but there is no index 20. So the math floor rounds that down to 19, and that's what we need. We need the 19, the 18, the 17, all the way down to 0 to work with to recall the right items in our array. So now that we've created a random variable that's gonna take a random number, multiply it by the length of quotes, and then round that down to give us a whole number, we want to pass that whole number to quote. Oops. So remember, quote right now is attached to the ID on the HTML that contains all the quotes. And now we're going to use this to change with that text and we're going to set that inner text to quotes, bracket. Now before we've used the bracket, in the bracket we've used I because I was the variable. And this, the variable is random, so that's what we're going to pass in here is the word random, the variable random. And so it's going to go into the array of quotes. It's going to pick this index, and remember the index has two things. It has a quote and a person, so we want it to extract the quote. Okay, and now we're going to do the exact same thing for person. So we can actually copy this, and then where we see quote, we could put in person, making sure I'm not confusing myself. So I think that should work. Let's test it out. So we save. Let's go over here to the console. Okay, let's see what happens. So in theory, every time I hit new quote, it's going to generate a random number, factor that into a whole number, and then give us the corresponding quote from the array we have here. So let's see what happens. Huzzah! It worked. The other thing that I thought of what was in the video that I thought I could adapt is they had a project on creating a frequently asked questions page. Okay, so let's look at it. Basically, we have 3 questions in this frequently asked questions. It's all about photography, something I know a little bit about. Again, I'll include the background image, which is my image, and let's look at the CSS on this one. So, if you notice over here, I have commented out this answer CSS, because basically this is what I'm going to use to hide all the answers, and so this will act as an accordion. And below it, okay, down here, it's looking for something that also has the class of active. So let's look at that in the HTML. So content container, and then we have the answer. Okay, and if I uncomment this out and hit save, this is what we have. Okay, this is all hidden. So we're going to use JavaScript to pop them back open. So the way we're doing it, and I'm going to comment these out line by line to explain it a little bit, is so the first way we're going to do it is we want to set the height. Oh. We want to set the height to 0. But if you do that, you get all this overflow. So now we have to deal with the overflow. So we set the overflow to hidden. Okay, and then this last item here, transition. When we do get the JavaScript in place and get it to move, the height is going to change from 0 to auto, and the transition is the speed at which that change is going to take place. It's a bit of animation. So, I think a frequently asked question is something that you might use on a lot of websites. It's a very common thing. Again, I made a little note if you download my files, is that we're using the document query selector, and we have to use the hashtag and dot notation when we're calling on those. Okay, so let's jump into the HTML. Okay, so basically, let's construct a variable. And let's call that FAQ. And that variable is going to equal document getElementByClassName. So it knows we want class names, so we don't have to include the dot. Okay, and the class we're looking for is content container, and let's console log that just so we can see it. And let's save that, and let's take a peek over here. Okay, and so we collected everything properly. That's good to know. So we can no longer need that. And now we'll add our functionality. We're going to use a for loop, and we've seen this many times. It's going to take the same form. I is going to start off equaling 0, and for as long as I is less than the length of the variable we're working with, which is FAQ. We'll copy that down here. Add a dot length, semicolon, and we want I to iterate. Oops. And so for as long as that's true, we want the following function to happen. You going to add the event listener. It's going to listen for a click. And when that click happens, it's going to run a function. And that function is going to reference this, which is whatever triggered it, similar to when we're using the eTarget. This class list dot toggle. You know, I said in one of the other demos it was kind of like a toggle. There is actually a function that does a toggle. So what this is going to do, this is what this is doing is whatever element triggered this, it's going to look at it, and if in the class list it has the class of active, it will remove it. And if it doesn't have the class of active, it will add it. So a shorter way of doing what we did before with an if-else statement. It's saved. Hasn't thrown an error. So let's see if it works. So if we click here, let's close the console. If we click them again, let's look at something. So let's look over here at let's see what happens when we click. And you can see right there, content container, the active class is being added. We clicked again, it's being taken away. And as you can see, much more work went into creating the HTML, and it's this simple little bit of code that's doing all the work. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this demo. This is probably the most I've talked in 3 weeks. Again, sorry for my voice. I will make everything available. I'm planning on putting stuff on codepen.io. And I'm also going to make all these files downloadable either through GitHub or my website. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.